Does your website have to be ADA compliant? Yes. So stick around to find out, what ADA compliance means, how you can achieve it and avoid potential litigation that will frustrate you and cost you a lot of money, and why it's really important to do this in the first place. So before we dig really into it, take a moment to subscribe to the channel if you find this helpful at all. It really helps us out and it helps me bring you more quality education for free. So let's jump right into it. So the American Disabilities Act was first signed in 1990, and it applies to websites. Websites are now a place of public accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it's something that private businesses as well as governments have to provide for their website visitors. So what is ADA compliance? The ADA is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on disability. You probably know that, but for a website to be compliant, it must be accessible to people who browse the web with assistive devices. So they don't have to be blind. It can just be like a color issue where a contrast issue. It can be blind people where they use text readers. If your website is not accessible to people with disabilities, it's not compliant with the law. Now, because of how the legislation is written, having a website that's not accessible to everybody will be interpreted as active discrimination. So if you're actively discriminating against people with disabilities, you're at risk of being sued, and it's that simple. I'm going to take a second to point out that lawsuits over ADA compliance have risen steadily year over year, and the plaintiff's bar just typically takes one industry. They'll write a complaint, which is the first document in a lawsuit, and then they'll write it, let's say, for chiropractors' offices, and they'll write all the details, and they kind of do that. And then from there, it's really easy to just swap out the name of the chiropractic office, the name of its website, and then file that complaint as well. So we typically tend to see plaintiffs' attorneys attacking one industry at a time, because it's quick to churn and burn that way. And it's a numbers game for them. They sue 200 chiropractors, and they might get settlements out of 20 of them. And that's worth it for them, right? So we do see it industry by industry. It is rising depending on the articles you read on the web. It rises 50% year over year. I've seen stats has risen 200% year over year. So depending on the year, it's going up because more and more businesses are starting, especially since the pandemic, which means more and more businesses have a website. And as an aside, most plaintiffs' attorneys know that there's a lot of cash to be made from doctors' offices, chiropractic offices, and health provider offices. So be aware that this is a real thing, and it's a real concern. But good news is there are a lot of ways you can fix it and avoid or deter these lawsuits as well. So with some exceptions, ADA compliance is required for most sites, and definitely for business sites, and definitely for government-run sites. Business websites are considered places of public accommodation under the law. And in the most recent article I saw, 50% year over year increase, which means 10 new lawsuits per day around the country. Are there any guidelines? So how can you fix this? What are the rules? How do you fix your website or make it so that it's more accessible? Now, the ADA doesn't have a black and white set of rules for you to follow, partly because it was adopted in 1990, but also partly because of the way our government works. So way before the internet, that was the ADA. But then after the internet came around, the Department of Justice considers the ADA applicable to government and business websites since at least 2008, but it won't weigh in on mandatory guidelines because Department of Justice is an executive branch office, and they defer to the legislature to create the guidelines, which Congress has not done that yet. So what can we do? There is a worldwide standard that is in effect. It's called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, WCAG. Right now we're at WCAG 2.0. Some of those standards are mandatory under other US laws, such as the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and the Air Carrier Access Act of 1986. But under the ADA, they're a voluntary technical standard. So there's no real technical standards under the ADA, and these WCAG standards are the best we have. So in order to meet ADA standards, right now the wisdom is to follow the WCAG 2.0 AA standards. So how do you do that? How do you become ADA compliant? Even though non-compliance with WCAG does not mean non-compliance with the ADA, that is still the best standard, and the Department of Justice has come out and said that as well, because it does provide a detailed roadmap for ensuring complete accessibility on your site. And it's going to be the standard that courts use if there's a lawsuit or there's a judgment or settlement. Anyways, so if your team doesn't have the resources to test your website, to look for areas of the website that need improving, or you don't have the time to get into the weeds of the WCAG standards, there's a lot of solutions out there for you. I use a solution called Atty, and I'll put a link to their software below. But what you do is you just put a line of code in the header section of your website. If you don't know what I'm talking about, they walk you through it. And it'll scan it using AI, scan it and look for any issues under the WCAG 2.0 standards. Now, some of those, the computer will be able to fix on the back end, but a lot of times they're going to flag issues for you to fix manually as well. I think there's a version where you can pay them to do the assessment with AI. Then you can pay humans, real humans with disabilities, to kind of audit your site and make sure that they're flagging everything that needs to be brought to your attention so that you can fix it as well. So what they do is they have that little widget, and they have a little widget accessibility bar there, and you'll see it on my site. But really, you may have to go in and change some things manually on your site. Big things that are flags are, images that don't have alt text. So if you hover your mouse over an image on a website, that there should be a little piece of text that pops up and explains what the image is. So if someone is blind or vision impaired and they're going through your website and they can't see any of the photos, then that's active discrimination and they're not accessing the full part of your website. So photos with no alt text is one big issue. Links that don't have proper descriptions of where they go is another issue. Same thing. So if you hover over a hyperlink that is hidden behind text and you don't know what the URL is, where you're going to go, the accessibility tools will help you identify that as well. Finally, it's important to have something that's ongoing, because you're adding blogs, you're adding videos, you're changing the website here and there. And so I personally use Atty at Functional Lawyer, and I'm happy to recommend them. I'll put a link down in the description here as well. So it takes one less thing off your plate. I bring to you a problem, and hopefully you'll be able to find a solution through Atty, or there's a few others out there as well. Best case scenario, you get some humans to help you out, but for the money, it's a good place to start at Atty. You just throw a line of code in there. They've got an accessibility kind of a menu that'll help with contrast and any other accessibility tools. Really hard to say. Don't say it 100 times in your 5-minute video. That will be a great start for you in order to at least, one, keep your website accessible to people so that you're not discriminating against anybody. But more practically, from a financial standpoint, and let's face it, cynically, that moves the needle most of the time. It will deter plaintiffs' attorneys from bringing suit against you if they see that you're taking steps towards accessibility, even if you're not 100% perfect all the time. So if you thought this was helpful, please hit subscribe. If you have any comments or anything that I missed, let me know below, and we'll see you guys in the next video.